Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. This episode is a bit of a flashback, and to explain, I've got a little bit of a story to tell. So this week, I had the privilege of speaking to the Indianapolis Dental Society, and the Army. I got to kind of combined efforts. It was supposed to be about the podcast and shared practices, but I got the Army to sponsor it, so I gave my Army spiel. Then we did podcast and practice ownership stuff. And then Gabrielle Karen organized this event. She's a listener of the show who's been listening since season 1. And she bought into a partnership. And so she was the one who reached out to me to organize all this. And we're like, hey, let's do a live podcast interview. Everything was going really great. Enjoyed her story. About 3/4 of the way through the live podcast, I looked down to check to make sure we weren't too loud, we weren't too quiet, and only her mic, the levels were showing up, and mine weren't showing up at all. And I realized in horror that my mic was not turned on. So I didn't let her know at that moment. I told her after the fact. I didn't let the audience know that our live podcast would unfortunately not be usable. But we're going to have her on the show another time. So in the meantime, we're going to flash back to an episode that's almost a year old now. And the reason that it's really exciting is we are doing an update episode tomorrow night. I'm going to record it. So that's Thursday. This will be for next week, next Friday. So this is with Dr. Megan Timm, who we love the stories from our show of people who are bold enough to buy a dental practice straight out of school. She bought 2. In rural Iowa, is crushing it. I got to meet her in person at Chicago Midwinter, and I'm really, really excited for her update episode. So for those who haven't listened that far back, or maybe they've forgotten, we're going to share with you today the original interview that we did in preparation for next week for the update interview. So another update, though, real quick before we get to the interview, is we are going to change how we are doing ads with the podcast. So in the past, we've baked the ads into the episode themselves. There's usually one like right about now, right as I finish my outro and right as the interview starts, and then another one in the middle of the episode. We're going to switch that up, and we're going to try something new where we use software after the fact to insert ads at the beginning and end of shows on all of our shows. So we're not going to bake anything into the episode. That doesn't mean anything to you other than that the ad location is going to change. And if you listen to the same episode 1 month and then maybe you listen to it like 3 or 4 months later, we might have a different sponsor on there. And that's going to give us the flexibility to do that. So this one, as of today, won't have any ads on it, but in the future it might. So it's kind of weird. So that'll be a change. So we'll see how that goes. But without further ado, here is the interview with Dr. Megan Timm. Okay, I have with us today Dr. Megan Timm. Megan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This is kind of awesome because I love having listeners of the show that are familiar with what we do and what we've talked about, and then are going out and actually applying it, which is what you are in the absolute middle of right now. So tell our listeners what the chaos of your life is right now.
Okay, well, yeah, my life is chaotic is the perfect word for it. So I'm a recent graduate, 2018 from the University of Iowa, and I decided, what the heck, let's just go for it. And I bought 2 practices, same doctor, but 2 different locations. So I'm in the midst of transitioning to 2 different practices while learning how to also dentist in the real world and raising a 1-year-old. So
nice, not healthy, normal balance.
Right.
That is so awesome. So you graduated. Let's see, we're at like August 16th right now. So you graduated maybe May, June, somewhere around then.
I graduated on my 26th birthday on May 25th.
Oh, that's awesome. Congrats.
What a great birthday present.
I know, right? Is it still weird being Dr. Timm, or are you like, have you eased into it yet?
It's totally weird. Like my hygienist came up to me yesterday and was like, "Hey, Dr. Timm, I have a patient with blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, ew, who's that? Like, call me Megan.
Oh, that's awesome. So I love asking that question because it just shows like how amazing it is that you're jumping into ownership at the same time that you're jumping into real life dentistry. Like you said, you're actually dentisting. I think you used it as a verb somehow, in the real world. So let's go back to the beginning and kind of chart your journey and share your experiences, and so others can both benefit and learn. Just like I know you said on our show that, Dr. Derek Williams, that his episodes, especially when he was in the heart of it, and then kind of his updates a few years later, impacted you. I think you're going to be that for some of our listeners. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's been quite a long time. I mean, I knew going into dental school, I wanted to own a practice. I mean, I don't know what it was about it, but like my dad was a small business owner. So I saw both the benefits and the hardships that came with that. But I knew D1 year I was gonna own a practice.
Was there ever like a moment where it was even before you came into dental school, or was it like when you were in dental school that like the light bulb clicked and you're like, you know what, I want to be a practice owner?
It was going into dental school. I mean, I was naive because I didn't even know what a root canal was, but
sure.
I knew I was going to own a practice.
Yeah.
So, I kind of,
go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, it was just one of the, it was an absolute in my mind. Like, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to become a dentist, and I'm going to buy a practice. Like, it wasn't even negotiable in my mind.
So you had the mindset that like, this is going to happen, I'm going to get there. When did that turn into, I want to own a practice as soon as possible?
I kind of had it a little bit in the back of my mind, even going my first year of dental school. Kind of at that time, my ideal scenario was to find a doctor that wanted to retire in 3 to 5 years and come out of dental school as like either an associate or immediately as a partner and have them phase out in that 3 to 5 year time period. So,
sure.
That's kind of what my ideal scenario was. And then this particular practice that I ended up finding, it was just all these perfects, everything just aligned that, maybe it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but it's like, all right, let's do it. Like, YOLO.
Yeah. Well, you were telling me yesterday about your school at Iowa had kind of a cool little office that not a lot of, I haven't heard of before at a lot of schools having this effective of a person that helps you guys out. So describe what they offered you to help you with practice ownership.
Yeah, we have an office at the university called the Office of Iowa Practice Opportunities. And her job was basically to connect graduating dentists with either dentists that were hiring or retiring dentists in the state of Iowa. So the whole initiative was basically to get graduating dentists to stay in Iowa because a large proportion of our current practicing dentists are nearing retirement age, just because a lot of people come out of state or even in-staters, once they graduate, flock away from the state. So it's kind of an initiative to get people to stay in the state of Iowa and help connect us with jobs. So I think I was in her office like the second week of dental school harassing her. So
nice. And was she... I feel like an office or a person like that in your dental school, it would all depend on how good that person was at actually connecting people. Where, like a school could say like, oh, we have this office of graduating new grads or connecting new grads with transitioning new grads. And you go in and they give you a pamphlet or they like tell you, yeah, this is how you do it. And then they don't actually connect you. So was she actually very proactive and helpful?
She was pretty decent. I mean, I was very persistent, so maybe it was more so for me, but so there's actually a website connected to the college's website where it's updated constantly with all the listings. So she manages that. And then once per year, there was a practice fair for the dental students. So some of it was vendors, loops, malpractice insurance, et cetera, et cetera. Sure. But there was a line of a couple booths of retiring dentists or towns that were seeking a dentist to come to them and do a startup. So that was another way that she connected people. And then she would also kind of connect with the alumni office and would have like a event where you would have like a speed mentorship type thing. So she did a lot of good networking and a lot of good online resources, kind of personalizing it. I think she was really overwhelmed. And so once I was persistent enough and harassed her constantly, she was really good at getting me the information that I wanted, but I was definitely harassing her.
Well, that's what it takes. And it sounds like you got way more out of that experience than maybe your average classmate did, because you were there all the time and you were persistent and you knew what you wanted.
Yeah, definitely.
So, a lot of people, including, George right now, George is in the exact same shoes as you. He's like 2 weeks ahead of you in terms of practice ownership, but essentially you guys are doing the same thing. Except he's not buying 2 practices. He's just buying 2 practices worth inside one practice, one big practice. You're buying 2 separate practices. He's gone through this whole, like, you know what? It would have been really nice to have some clinical experience under my belt. He knew that it would be that way, but it still just is hitting him right now. How did you decide that you were going to be okay without a residency, without a GPR AGD, that you didn't want to specialize? How did you go through that whole process? And what's your perspective on that now that you're actually doing dentistry in the real world?
I just amped myself up and said, you can do this. You're fine. Maybe a little bit too much confidence. They say you come out of school with the most confidence that you'll ever have, and then you realize what you don't know, and it falls fast. So
sure.
I definitely know my limits, and I'm pretty good at case selection. I feel like I know I'm not going to mess around with trying to place implants or really complicated endo, and probably won't do too much for dentures and removable unless it's fairly easy. But we're lucky at Iowa, and I assume probably a lot of dental schools do the same thing, where in our 4th year, 10 weeks were spent off-site. So you kind of get a taste of real-world dentistry. So one of my off-site rotations was at a Medicaid kids clinic. So it was a patient on the hour, every hour. So that really helped me with my speed. I did a ton of SSCs, a ton of pulps, a ton of TEs. So that really helped my confidence with kids, particularly because when I did my kids rotation in dental school, 3rd year, I was pregnant. So I didn't use any nitrous. So I got the really well-behaved kids for operative. So I got no experience with behavior management. And now I'm a boss. I will tell kids to shut up and put their hands on their stomach and open wide and don't talk. So it was really good. A good experience. And then my second rotation
wait. Let me just ask. So wait, it was because you were pregnant, you were like, I don't want any nitrous around me.
Yeah, so I didn't care. I'm sure you can already tell by the way we're talking. I'm just I don't care. I'm still
sure.
I personally didn't care, but I asked the head of the pediatric department, I'm like, hey, I'm pregnant. Just so you know, I don't know if there's any precautions we need to take. And he was like, well, technically we have the scavenger system and it should be fine, but let's not risk it. So
That's awesome. So you got kind of screwed, but at the same time, it ended up working out in your benefit because you had to learn pedo with no aid at all. It's all you and the kid.
Yeah. It was wild. It was a good experience. I loved it. And that's what made me really fall in love with pedo.
So did you think about specializing at all, or?
Yeah, I did. And I'm pretty decent friends with a lot of the assistants in pedo, and they try to encourage me to do it. But, I kind of had the end goal in mind, and I mentioned it to my husband briefly, and he was like, heck no, you are not going to any more schools. You are making money.
That's awesome. Is he? Yep. What does he do? Does he work right now?
Yep, he's a financial advisor. So he's been doing that since we graduated college at the same firm. So.
Well, that's awesome that during dental school and during this transition, he's kind of been your help, and financially you've got a little bit more stability than maybe someone who is a single income earner or a single debt earner in dental school. So that definitely helps. So let's get into this practice. So you said that sometime around 3rd year, you stumbled across this practice. So tell us about how you found it, all the different things you were trying to do to find a practice, and what actually found you the practice.
Okay. So what I was doing was basically, like I said, harassing the woman in that office and telling her, I knew I wanted to go back home to Williamsburg, Iowa, or at least within the vicinity. And so I basically said, find me something within a 30-mile radius and there were some leads. I think part of it was at the time I was like first, second, third year dental student. So they kind of brushed me off, probably rightfully. But what happened is this particular dentist, it's a husband and wife dental team. They're both dentists. He's not practicing anymore, but they go to church with my in-laws, and every so often they knew I was in dental school, would just mention, oh, is Megan going to come back home? Does she want to buy her practice? And I was like, yeah, whatever. And then I woke up one day and like a fire was lit under my butt. And I was like, I think I had seen actually a listing for their practice on the Iowa Office Practice Opportunities website. And I was like, oh no, they just listed it with a broker. So I emailed them and I said, hey, I want to buy your practice or at least look at it. And it kind of went from there. So
you reached out to them directly instead of reaching out to their broker?
Yes.
Okay. And what were like the things that you were looking for in a practice? Like what were your non-negotiables and what were your like things that you were willing to be flexible on? Or were you just like, I just need a practice? I mean, I was so oblivious that I didn't know what I was looking for. I mean, I had spent enough time like on Dental Town, on the various forums, talking to professors, podcasts. So I kind of knew like roughly what good numbers were, but they gave me this whole packet of all this stuff. And I was like, I don't know what the heck I'm looking at. So it was really like the big thing for me was I wanted to go back home, or at least in the area. And being from small town Iowa, there's only so many practices to choose from, and so many of those practices are retiring dentists. So it was a very small pool to choose from. So that was the big thing. It was in the ideal location, and I knew I liked pedo. I also have like a strange love affair for perio. Like I love perio, like in a weird way. Perio is awesome. It's not weird at all. Like
Thank you.
Well, okay, let me take that back. Do you love like osseous surgery, like dealing with the disease side of perio, or like the aesthetic, like grafting, crown lengthening side of perio?
No, I like
crown lengthening.
I've done crown lengthening, and that was fine. It was cool, but I just love like the black schmutz.
Okay.
Underneath that comes out. It's like very rewarding.
It is, but like osseous surgery is a lot of work. Like I feel like that's the most work in all of perio, is like just that like opening someone up and then there's just like stuff everywhere and you got to clean it all out and reduce the bone and like get everything to lay back down. That's awesome. So that's like, you just knew you loved that.
Yeah, I thought it was cool. So it was nice to find a practice that they were a very bread and butter dentistry and very good at that. So I really wanted to find a practice that, you know, I knew I would be slower. I knew I would, you know, kind of not be as confident and take on a lot of complicated cases. So I wanted to be able to expand in some sort. So she doesn't really pull many teeth. She'll do some endo. And like I said, she'll see some kids, but she doesn't do like stainless steel crowns and pulps and things like that, or like much behavior management. So I knew I could add in that sort of way at least and expand the practice that way.
Cool. So you kind of knew like, okay, I love bread and butter plus this and this. And so the fact that they were just doing bread and butter, you knew you could bring something to the table right away that might make up for if you were slow or trying to get up to speed on certain things.
Yep, exactly.
Well, so explain how this whole like 2-location thing works. Cause it's like you're buying one practice, but you're buying 2 practices. So what's the dynamic there? How close are they? Like, how are they owned? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still confused. Let me tell you that. So it's wild. So how it was, so it's for them, it's the same legal entity, just 2 physical locations of it.
Okay.
And like I was saying, they are husband and wife dental team. So he was a practicing dentist up to a couple of years ago when he had a stroke. So they used to both be full-time dental practices. And
so like 4 or 5 days a week, each of them?
Yep, like 4 days a week, each of them.
Okay.
And so since his stroke, she's really had to take the brunt of the work. So they've since gone down to 2 days at each practice.
Okay.
And she's the only dentist there. And so as of right now, I'm continuing that same schedule with the hopes to get an associate to be a partner soon. So that is my hope. And how we're separating it is a little bit different, which I'm actually going through credentialing right now, and I'm realizing I just made myself a huge mess because each location is a different business entity, but then it's owned by an overarching business entity. So we did that. so that I could share a bank account, file the same tax returns, but also have them legally separated so that when it comes time to partner with somebody, it's a lot cleaner to show the income and things like that.
So you're buying one entity and splitting it into two because it's two physical locations.
Yep.
Okay. So then you can transition how and when you want to on one of those while maintaining full ownership of the other.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So how close are they? Like how is one bigger than the other? Are they in the same town, different towns? Like what does this look like?
They're in two towns about 30 miles apart, 30-minute drive, so not too far.
Okay.
They physically are about the same size. So the two offices are in towns called Sigourney and Williamsburg. So the Sigourney office has two doctor ops, a hygiene op, and then an overflow op. So it could be another hygiene op, another doctor op, whatever you want it to be. It's not really used too often. And then in Williamsburg, there are two hygiene ops and two doctor ops.
Okay, so
they're both similar sizes.
4-chair practices. They're 30 minutes apart. How big are the respective towns?
So the town of Williamsburg is about 3,000, and the town of Sigourney is a little bit smaller. I think it's about 2,300 to 2,500.
Wow, so we just moved to a town in Elgin, Oklahoma that's like 3,000, 4,000, somewhere in there. I don't have like the latest census data, but like it's a small town. We have like a McDonald's and a Sonic and like a small grocery store that isn't my favorite because there's nothing in there. And, so like I'm getting a real world perspective for living in a town that small. So that's something you grew up with because you grew up in Williamsburg, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So
like when you look at those demographics, you said earlier when we were talking before the show that there's another dentist in town. But is that only the actual town boundaries itself? Like what's the surrounding demographics and how big of an area does it pull from?
So yeah, 3,000 is just the town itself. And the way small town Iowa is, as I'm sure most rural communities are, is there's this town of, 2,000 to 3,000, and then surrounding that town is a bunch of little towns of maybe 1,000, maybe a couple hundred. So the pool actually ends up being a lot bigger than what you would expect. So the report that we were given on the practices was Williamsburg has a pool of 14,000 and Sigourney has a pool of like 11,000.
Okay, cool. So there's a lot more room for both growth and for maybe another dentist in town without being like sweating that like, oh no, this is not good demographics.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of the way I thought of it is, the practice was for sale. So first of all, it's not another dentist coming in. It's keeping the dental ratios the same.
Yep.
So if it wasn't me coming in, it would have been somebody else. So I don't know.
Yeah,
That's kind of how I feel about it.
No, they're great numbers. Like if you look at the poll, is there another dentist? So there's another dentist in Williamsburg, or there's another dentist? Is it Sigourney? Like Sigourney Weaver? Like how do you say it? Sigourney.
Like Sigourney. Yeah. So there's there's two other dentists in Williamsburg. One who she's in her late 30s.
Okay.
And so she's got a lot of practice left and like a lot of life left in her practice.
Sure.
She's not retirement age by any means. Then there's another one. He is actually my parents' neighbor, grew up and was an adjunct at the dental school. He's kind of, I think, slowing down, he's going to retire when he wants to retire, not taking any new patients, that kind of guy. So, I kind of don't really count him in as much just because I think he's on the downhill, slope. Retirement is in the forefront. And then in Sigourney, there's another dental office that is a satellite office to a town like 30 minutes away. And so they're only open 2 days a week.
Okay. Wow. So you basically have these two towns, not to yourself, but overall, like really favorable demographics.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very excited about that.
That's awesome. How much revenue did they do a good job of separating out each practice, or is it kind of all lumped together in one mess of accounting?
Yeah, it's kind of all lumped together. I mean, they were willing to split up the practices and sell them separately.
Sure.
But they just kind of gave me all the numbers all in one. So the revenue is pretty good. I mean, when it was a 2-doctor practice, it was like 1.3, 1.2 million. And then it was, I think, 775 this last calendar year as a one doctor practice.
Well, that's like, in some ways, you don't want practices that are slowing down, but when a practice has a definite reason why it's slowed down, it's not that like the town is dying or that the doc was slowing down or that, the dentistry had been done or whatever. There was another doctor there who could no longer practice. So that you can grow right back up to that 1.2, 1.3. So that's kind of cool to have that in your belt, knowing, okay, add some specialty procedures, maybe get another doctor on, and I have the chance to really ramp this back up to where it was before.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what excites me, is that it's been a 2-doctor practice before. So there's definitely that room for growth and that potential is there. So it's not like just a dream. It's definitely something that is closer to reality than you would expect.
Okay, cool. Well, so let's go back to the timeline. So you reached out to them because you saw that they had listed it. They had it with a broker. Did you bring on like a buyer broker to represent you? Did you just deal directly with them? Did you kind of bring on their broker as dual representation? How did the negotiations work out?
I really wanted it to be just us and them, but I imagine that because they had contracted with the broker already, that regardless of how they were found, he had to be used.
Yeah, so it was too late at that point, which is like, you're like, no, that's a great thing though, too, because then you've got a professional involved. And even though, he's representing them, at least it's all organized and done the proper way, hopefully, if it's a good broker.
Yeah, he almost has kind of a monopoly in the area. He's really the only significant broker in the area. So you get what you get with that one. I don't have too fond of experiences to say, but maybe that's just the whole broker experience in general.
Well,
and negotiations are difficult no matter how well you get along with the person, which I remember George was talking about in a segment a little bit ago, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So. That even though he had great goodwill and experience with the owners, stuff still like got lawyers on both sides and they're saying things, and then you're not supposed to talk to each other supposedly for, this period of time. And you're like, what's going on in their head? And you don't know what's going on. So if you don't mind sharing, did you have any sticking points that were really frustrating for you that you were like, you wanted X, Y, or Z, or they were kind of the broker was being weird, or they were being weird about stuff that was concerning to you?
It was just, I started this negotiation like third year. So some of it has like disappeared from my mind, probably intentionally because I'm blocking it out.
Sure.
But it was just, I felt like he was kind of the broker, not the sellers, was talking down to me, and kind of like, he would say things like making me feel stupid, like basic accounting things that I actually knew, but would like talk to me like I didn't know what they were. And then he would send out a lot of emails with ultimatums. Like, we were working on like the letter of intent, and I had brought on an attorney, thank the Lord, because he was like a bulldog and like did so much for me. I'm like indebted to him. I'm waiting for that bill to come, so nice. I won't be indebted too much longer.
Right.
But, no, he did great work for me. But so, he'd be modifying some of the things because, of course, the broker would just send over the stock version of whatever his clients use. And so he would modify it, and then it would be taking too long in the broker's eyes, and he would send me an email, like an ultimatum saying, well, if you don't get this back in 24 hours, we're going to relist the practice and open it up because they have given you courtesy of being a dental student and holding this practice for a year and a half. And they could have sold it a long time ago. And I'm like, whatever.
So really trying to strong arm you and take advantage of the situation where he was assuming you're kind of like a clueless dental student who doesn't really know what they're doing.
And it doesn't sit well with me. Like, ultimatums are like not my style and threatening. Like, it's just not a good look and not a good move. I don't know.
No, you're totally right. And it's just, you're like, okay, I thought we wanted to work together on this. So that's frustrating. And then you're like contacting your lawyer and like trying to get stuff back. And it just adds a lot of stress and ickiness to the situation.
Yeah. And there was definitely moments where I was like freaking out because I'm like, oh my God, they're going to pull this from me.
Yeah.
It ended up working out. And, I kind of wasn't sure if this was coming from the seller, is this coming from the broker. So I kind of felt weirded out that way too. But now that the deal has been done, our relationship is is great.
Did they have other kind of people reaching out to them with offers? Like, had it been listed enough, or was it public enough that other people knew about it and you just kind of were there first, and so they had people knocking on their door that way?
They have never gone into great detail with me about that. They had mentioned that there was like one office that was interested in buying Sigourney, but more as like, I think it was the satellite office wanted to buy Sigourney to kind of monopolize it. So basically buy the charts. And then there was another guy and there was another guy who was, his wife was a pharmacist in the neighboring town. And so he thought about buying the practice. So they never found a buyer to buy both of them at the same time. And they kind of had told me that it was really important to them to have someone come into the office that was local or that they just really felt good about. Because this is an office that they started right when they graduated dental school. And, it's been their baby. They've cultivated it and fostered it. And it's hard to let go of patients that you've been with for 30 years and you want to know they're in good hands. So
you definitely... Like, how did you establish that relationship with them? Like when you first reach out to them, did you come like tour their office and have dinner with them? What advice would you give to people who like can see the value of that? Like, I want to be the type of dentist that the owner wants to have in their practice. Like, how did you build that rapport, and like what kind of sealed that for them and for you both? Yeah, I definitely, it helped that they knew who I was because they go to church with my in-laws. So they at least knew of me and that I, was going to be a dentist and was finishing up dental school. But I sent the email, just kind of explained who I was and that it's always been my dream to come back home. And they set up a meeting and we just kind of met at the office, very casual, just looked around the office, didn't really talk numbers, didn't talk much. It was mostly kind of like a get to know ya. And I think that really helped. I mean, that relationship was kind of the only thing I had on my side because I didn't have, I wasn't licensed at that time. So I knew that they were signing up for waiting another year and a half. At the time, I didn't know where my money was coming from. I didn't even know if I could afford to buy this practice. I just knew I wanted it. So, definitely just forming that relationship and just letting them know that you're going to be the right choice for their patients, because truly after working for that long, your patients are your family. I mean, you've seen them since they were little, and then now their kids are having kids, so. No, for sure. Well, okay. So, you kind of convinced them because they liked you and they knew that you wanted to buy both practices and you're going to stick around. You convinced them to wait. So now you had to get lending. So that's always the big issue for a graduating dental student buying a bigger practice, or in your case, two practices together into one big entity. So how did you get lending, and how hard was it not having, production history and all this stuff? Like I told you when we were talking earlier, I feel like I pulled the wool over everybody's eyes and I like fooled everyone into giving me all this money because it really wasn't that hard. So, the brunt force of my funding is through a program in the USDA. The program is called the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Program. Okay. So they will fund up to 80% of your project, up to $1 million, and the terms are 0% interest over 10 years. And they'll give you a 2-year deferment also to start payments if you want. So I got that. This blew my mind yesterday when you told me this. Like, it's the United States Department of Agriculture. That's who we're talking about when we say USDA, right? Yep. They have this, because at first I thought you were talking about like the Small Business Administration loans, which have like a rap for having all this paperwork and they're hard and they're not the greatest terms, but then you can refinance it later. So at first, like, that's where my mind went. And then you're like, no, this is a USDA program with 0 interest. And did you have to have a down payment? No. And up to 2 years of deferment. Up to 2 years of deferment. This is like mind blown. Like I've never heard of this. So how did you find out about this program? And then walk us through how it works and how hard it was and what you had to do. So I found out through this program through that same woman who has a department at school. She was hosting a lunch and learn, and the people who came to that lunch and learn were through the Iowa Area Development Group. So it's basically like a economic development group for the state of Iowa. So a lot of small towns, a lot of, states with lots of rural areas have a similar development group. So
they came and were talking about how they can help fund practices. And there's two different options. So one was this specific loan program. Then there's another one that's a loan repayment program through it's called FIND, Fulfilling Iowa's Need for Dentists. So that one is loan repayment, and you have to take a certain percentage of Medicaid patients. And sounds selfish, but I didn't want to sign up for that because I think it was 25%. And just the state of the Iowa Medicaid program right now was something I didn't want to get wrapped up into.
Sure.
So I looked at this loan, and so how it works is it is a grant from the USDA to a rural telco company or electric company, and then they loan you the money at those terms.
Okay, so it is kind of local, but it's kind of federal?
Yes. Yep. So the whole goal of the program is to establish economic development, and then the money that you pay back the telco or the electric company with becomes a revolving loan funds for other companies that are local to pull from.
Okay, cool. So it's we want more people to stay rural, so we're going to fund businesses that are in these rural locations. How rural do you have to be? How far are you outside of, what's the nearest major metro to you right now?
So to me, from Williamsburg, Iowa City, which is where the University of Iowa is 20 minutes away. And the town of Williamsburg is actually just off the interstate. So I'm not particularly rural by any means. And I looked up this loan program to verify that there was no criteria.
Yeah.
And the only criteria it had was it's for projects in rural areas or towns with a population of 50,000 or less. So 50,000 is pretty generous in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. That's a decent size town. And it sounds like it doesn't have to be some crazy distance from a major metro.
Nope.
That's awesome. So did you apply for this after you had put in a letter of intent? When did you start getting funding from this, and how long did it take? And was it a lot of work to get this?
Yeah, so I had done the letter of intent, and luckily my attorney had put in a stipulation that it was pending getting funding from the specific program. We were looking at if I didn't get approved for this, the seller was willing to help out a little bit and do some seller-backed funding.
Okay.
I would have had to borrow some money from family and,
Sure.
make some things happen. But we had a backup plan in case this would fall through.
Okay.
So we had that stipulation in the letter of intent and the contracts and everything. And so how this program works is they sit down once a quarter and go through the applications that they have at the time. And I ended up submitting in the second quarter. I think I submitted sometime in March. So I actually didn't even hear about my funding
Of this year or last year?
Yeah, this year.
Okay.
It has to be in the year that you want to acquire. So
okay.
I submitted in March, and then I heard middle of July that I got it for sure.
Oh, wow. So just a month ago you found out.
Yeah. They had, it was pretty certain. I mean, when I submitted the app, and she had told me, the person who helped me fill out the application through the Iowa Economic Development Group, she had said that historically they've never had a dentist get denied.
Nice.
So it's not a for sure thing, but this isn't a dentist specific loan program,
right.
But they have certain criteria that ranks you, and medical is at the highest ranking. So pretty much anyone who's in medical, dental, anything like that gets put to the top of the application.
Nice. Okay, cool. So you kind of had a little bit of an advantage because they want medical and dental offices in these small towns, and that's one of the aims of the program. Yep.
So actually, getting this wasn't too much. I mean, there's an application. It's mostly writing a grant proposal. Mine ended up being 50 pages. So it's a lot.
It just seems like a lot of work. Did your lawyer help, or was that mainly you?
No, I did it all myself.
Wow. Holy cow. Okay, cool.
Yeah. But a lot of it is stuff that takes up entire pages. If you want to do, I'm doing a renovation on one of my offices. So one page is the blueprint. One page is what my floors will look like. And one page is the quote. So it's not hard to get to 50 pages,
sure.
Truthfully. But really the hardest part was finding that 20% supplemental financing.
Yeah.
So you can either provide that yourself. You can, that could technically be considered a down payment. Otherwise, you can go to a private bank and get that. It really wasn't that hard, but it was harder than applying for this program. So we ended up looking for small private banks because we banked at a private bank. So we kind of knew that just that smaller, we'd have a better chance because they kind of take the time to get to know you rather than if you fit all these check marks in a box. So sat down with 3 different banks. And well, actually started off with 2. And one of our friends, or the guy who was helping us at one of the banks, ended up relocating to a different bank and became the president of that bank. And
wow.
So his wife, because he technically wasn't allowed to reach out to us, but his wife reached out and said, "Hey, Kevin is at this bank now. Just give him a call." And originally it was just to get our personal finances transferred over to him. But we were like, "Hey, Kevin, we're looking at doing this. Do you think you guys would be able to help us out?" And just gave him the office financials, signed some paperwork. And then that was that. Pretty much the only thing that they really wanted was first rights to the real estate and all the assets in case I were to default, which USDA didn't have any issues with. They didn't really have any interest in taking the real estate or anything.
Wow. So very generous terms from USDA, and then just relationship-based lending. And, they based it on the financials of the practice and everything. So you had a pretty awesome lending setup, and that included the real estate, right?
Yep.
So you now will own both locations, and you bought both practices. How much was the total, if you don't mind me asking, for both practices plus the real estate, everything bundled in together?
It was about 1.1.
Okay.
That's including I got a piano, rotary endo, and then $150,000 of working capital.
Nice.
So the numbers for the actual practices themselves are the practice was 520, and then the 2 buildings, one was 170 and one was 140.
Okay. And so then you said it was 20% had to come from the private lending. So it was, just over 200,000 that you got from the bank, and then the rest you got from the USDA.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So does the bank offer any deferral on that, or are you going to be paying everything kind of upfront from the start?
I asked them if they would, and so they said that they're going to give me 6 months where I can just pay interest only.
Okay, cool. So you're going to have a nice kind of ramp up from at first interest only with the bank and nothing to the USDA if you want. And then later on you can add, it all up together over the course of the next 2 years. But a very advantageous lending situation.
Yeah, I lucked out with that one.
That's so sweet. That's really, really cool that that's all working out, and you're going to own both practices, real estate and all. So now let's go to graduation. How did you decide that you were going to work there for a little bit? Because I know that's what you're currently doing. You haven't actually closed yet. So I was going to ask you about, meeting the staff and transitioning in. How is this kind of interim time working out for you?
Yeah, it's working out well. I mean, I would have liked to transition in sooner, but we're kind of limited by when I get to close with the USDA, which is actually the 23rd. So next Thursday, a week from today, I close with the USDA, which then I can close with the owners. So it's worked out really, really well. The 2 of the assistants and the front desk, they're all around my age. I'm still younger than everybody, but it's kind of been good. They all have young kids like I do, so we've been able to kind of connect on that front.
Yeah.
I've been slowly talking to them about, I'm kind of breaking all the rules because everyone says when you step into a practice, don't change a darn thing.
Yeah.
And I'm changing everything.
That's what George is doing. He's wanted to really hold off and wait. And he's like, screw it. I'm changing crap.
Yeah, literally. So, I mean, we are rebranding.
Nice.
This is a very insurance heavy office, and I'm only doing Delta Premier, and then I'm doing Medicaid to see kids, but dropped a lot of the insurances.
Nice.
So, we're just changing a bunch of stuff. So I've been kind of trying to take as much time as I can to go over with the staff, what I do differently. And I mean, I understand that I'm going to make mistakes and things are going to be difficult on my end, so be patient with me. But I know the things I'm asking you guys to do is also going to take a lot of getting used to. So kind of just creating a mutual understanding, creating more of a perio program So I kind of made some perio protocols. So this is when we'll do a prophy, because right now all of my new patients funnel in through hygiene, and I do cleanings as long as they're not a perio patient. So kind of gave some protocol for that. So just changing a lot of things.
That's awesome that you just kind of know what you want and you're like, nah, this isn't what we want. I'm going to change it. It's okay. What has been the hardest part of this transition that maybe you didn't expect, or maybe you knew would be hard? What's hard or weird, or any specific stories of like it being stressful, meeting the staff or anything like that?
Really, it's just kind of like taking on the role of being the boss, because I want to be friends with everybody and I don't like hurting feelings and I don't know how to be mean.
Yeah.
So I'm not doing a very good job of not being friends. If we go out to lunch like every day. So I'm kind of failing on that end, but really like they'll come and ask me about like, oh, so are we going to continue our IRA? They do it through Vanguard right now. I'm like, oh, we are going to do an IRA, but we're going to do it this way, blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
but they're asking me
don't
about how
kill
much vacation
Vanguard.
time.
I love Vanguard.
My husband's a financial advisor.
I know. Financial advisors and I don't typically get along, so I won't talk with your husband. It's okay.
Yeah. So they're asking about that, and then they're asking about vacation and sick time, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. I haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
Because they don't have an office manual right now, and I'm trying to write mine, but I'm just so indecisive on some things because I'm kind of a softie. I'm like, well, if this were me, like maternity leave, like technically we're so small that we're exempt from FMLA.
Okay.
So we don't have to allow the full 12 weeks. But I'm like, I got 16 weeks off when I had my son. So
right.
I don't know. It's like I'm very conflicted.
I'm the same way, and my last dental assistant in residency, he's like, Dr. Lowe, I had Mr. J. I had the only guy in a whole dental clinic of like 2 stories and over 30 providers. He's like, Dr. Lowe, you got to be meaner. Your next dental assistants, you got to like hold them to a higher standard, because he's like, you're just too nice. Like you don't know how to yell at people. Like, so knowing how to, like, hopefully you don't have to get burned to like learn how to put your foot down about certain stuff. And I'm the same way. Like I'm going to be taking over this clinic of 32 chairs here at Fort Sill, and I'm going to have to be the boss and write people up and do crap that sucks. And I know I'm going to have to do it, but it sounds like maybe if you have a great team and can nip things in the bud, that you won't have to do too much of that awful stuff.
Yeah, I'm hoping that, and
but that's a fantasy for both of us. We know that's not true, but that's okay.
Yeah, there's gonna be some times, and I don't know. We'll see.
No, for sure. That's awesome. That was my last question. So I wanted to ask you, how do they run the staff between the 2 offices? Because for a while they had 2 full offices going simultaneously. Then they had 1 doc going between the 2 practices. So and now they're back to 2 docs. You're there 2 days a week and she's there 2 days a week. Did they fire people and then had to hire people back to get, kind of both practices running at the same time? How does that work?
So a lot of their staff had kind of been with them since the beginning. So a lot of them have kind of retired or left on their own, like on good terms. So right now, she's got a sufficient staff for what she needs. And I haven't brought on any more people.
Okay. But
because
do they go between the 2 practices, or?
The assistants in the front desk do.
Okay.
The hygienists are at each location.
And
so there's 2 hygienists in Williamsburg and 1 in Sigourney.
Is there hygiene going on when you're not there, or is it just like 2 days of hygiene per practice?
Yep, just 2 days of hygiene per practice.
Okay, cool. So you're going to have to make the call of like, do I want to scale this and when to bring people on?
Yeah, I already have kind of thought about bringing another assistant on, because I've kind of already noticed that there's times where just having an extra hand to, help flip rooms or get that emergency patient started or even do assisted hygiene.
Sure.
So I might bring on another assistant here shortly, and then hopefully from there, slowly but surely, more and more staff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And you've got all the fun and stress ahead of you. You're closing in a week and then it's going to be all you. Are you nervous for like being the only person there that's the doctor?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky that the selling doctor is willing to stay on and help me when I need her. I told you that the office is kind of too small for us both to be doing dentistry at the same time. So she's just going to finish and all her cases, seat the crowns that she has going on. But after that, if there's something on my schedule that I have no idea what is going on, or I just don't feel very comfortable with it, she is kind of on retainer, if you will, until January to come help me on certain things if I need them. So that kind of gives me a little bit of a sense of security, but I've kind of noticed I think I'm glad to be on my own just because we have some different treatment philosophies, and it doesn't make one of us right or wrong. It's just, you develop your own philosophy over time. I think it's going to be good that there's not two of us with differing views trying to treat the same patient,
Sure. No, absolutely. And sometimes, there's pros and cons to either side. And like, this is just one of the advantages. You're like, okay, we're a little bit different. We do dentistry differently. That's okay. And you're going to have a nice clean break to just be able to do what you want to do.
Yep.
Well, cool. This has been awesome. I hope our listeners are inspired. I love your confidence and just that like everything has worked out for you time after time, and doors have opened and you've taken advantage of it. Do you have any advice for our listeners, either that are in this process or about to go through this process? What would you say to someone who's, doesn't know if they want to do it or they're not sure how it's going to go?
Well, first, I have two different things. So the first would be persistence is key. Like sometimes no one cares more about your stuff than you do. So, other people have busy lives. So if there's someone that you need something from or that you want, to get more information from, like, don't be afraid to hound somebody. You just have to be persistent, and you have to be that person that sends emails all the time. Like I just harass people all the time over email, and that's sometimes what you have to do.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And then the second thing I would say, and this is what has been the best thing for me, is just find mentors, find people who are willing to share their experiences with you. There was a lot of people at the dental school practicing dentists. We have a lot of adjuncts that come in fourth year. So they're out in the real world managing their own practices. There was one girl that graduated 2 years before I did that had bought a practice. So I leaned on her a lot. I leaned on a lot of the other adjunct faculty and just kind of pick people's brains. So don't be afraid to find somebody and ask them to be your mentor or just bounce ideas off. Actually, I found someone who I'm going to dinner with tonight at 6, just because she's a mom and a new practice owner. I'm like, hey, let's get together and talk about it because I don't know what I'm doing.
Nice.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to people that you think you might want a similar path to, because you can learn a lot from someone and about their mistakes and their successes that they've done. So
100%. No, that's what this show is all about. And that's what you're doing here right now. But that willingness to reach out to people and be persistent, it could be a little awkward. You don't want to be annoying, and people are like, well, they read the email and they're going to reply back to me, so I don't want to bug them again. But like, no, you need to bug them again because they're busy. I'm the same way. Like if people have reached out to me and they're like annoyed that I never got back to them, one, I was in residency and I didn't get back to anyone, so I'm sorry. But two, like reach back out to me because stuff happens and just things kind of fall off the list of things you can pay your attention to. And if someone comes back up on that radar, like, I meant to reply to this person, but I didn't. And then you pound out a reply. So don't be afraid of offending people that you don't know, because worst case scenario, you still don't know them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm notorious for like reading an email and thinking I need to respond to it and forgetting. So if anyone ever reminds me, like I'm never offended by it. So I assume most people aren't offended by getting reminded. Like we're busy people, and like the technology day that we're in, you see an email, set it down and forget about it. So I'm never offended when people have to bug me. So
awesome.
I always bug other people.
That's such good advice, because that skill, I think, is what got you into this practice and what had your vision set and is what caused you to be successful so far. So, and in addition to all the other good qualities that you have, but I think that's an awesome skill set for our listeners to adopt. So thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a lot of fun, and it still like blows my mind that every time we have someone on the show like you that's doing this straight out of school or who's had their version of these experiences, there's new stuff to learn. Even though we've talked with X number of people before, your experience is unique, and you brought a ton to the table today. So thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's so much fun. And if anyone ever wants to reach out to me, feel free to do so. I love talking about myself. So
Cool. No, yeah, that's perfect. Facebook, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, Facebook is great. Just Megan Timm on Facebook. Otherwise, my email is Megan Timm, MEGANTIMMDDS @gmail.com. So you can always send me an email or find me on Facebook. I love making new Facebook friends because I love stalking people on Facebook. So.
Nice. Awesome. Cool. Well, we'll put that in the show notes. We'll link to your Facebook profile so people can reverse stalk you. So we'll be good to go with the stalking. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Okay, that was a great flashback. Her story is amazing. She's been a great contributor on our Facebook page, and I am so excited to talk with her again for next week's episode. In other news, we broke 500,000 downloads on the podcast this week. So that was extremely exciting. Thank you guys for sticking with us and for the downloads and the reviews. We're now at 313 on reviews in iTunes. So thank you everyone to everyone who's reviewed and everyone who is on our Facebook page. So we've got some exciting stuff coming up with George and Matt here soon. And I just put an offer in on a house. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a break while they do some episodes next month, but we'll do a few more here together and then we'll turn it over to them for a minute. But we will talk with you guys next week on the Shared Practices Podcast.